Hello and welcome. I'm Alana, and I'm excited to have you join me as we start to explore the physical context of the second part of the Gospel of John. In my first video on the Gospel of John, we spent some time talking about the context of the author, what I mean by physical context, and my purpose in making these videos. I'd encourage you to watch that video for more details on all of those things, but to save you time, I'm going to try to summarize the basics here. First, author context. While I'm primarily interested in the context of the events of the gospel, it is necessary to take the context of the author into account, the who, what, when, where sort of questions. After all, if it had been written centuries after the events it described, we wouldn't expect a high degree of accuracy in many of the details. So, while there is room for scholarly disagreement on all of these questions, I think there is enough evidence to suggest that the author was, first off, an eyewitness disciple of Jesus. Second, someone who desired to give an accurate account of the life of Jesus. And third, it was likely written in or around Ephesus towards the end of the first century. Second, I want to give you a reminder of what I mean by physical context. Most Christians believe that context is important, but what they mean by context can vary wildly. From what I have seen, most often it means textual context. What do other passages of the Bible say on the same topic? Sometimes other writings, like those of Josephus, might be taken into account. However, things like place names or comments about festivals or cultural details are often overlooked as being either irrelevant or too hard to understand. And that's what I want to focus on, specifically those aspects that are explicitly mentioned in the text. We will take into account the more implicit context as well, but as that can be quite extensive, we'll try to just use it where it seems most helpful. My goal isn't to do a verse-by-verse examination of everything or totally teach through the book, but to be a resource for people who might want to do that. I want to answer the question, what sort of background information should I know before I start looking at theological implications and applications? So, on to new material. The rest of the previous video I divided mostly by topic, but I have found that harder to do with the second part of the gospel for a number of reasons. So, here's the plan. I'm going to overview some of the main topics that we will encounter in the rest of the gospel, but then we're going to go chapter by chapter, and I'm just going to point things out that I think are interesting or relevant. I won't talk about everything of interest, but we'll try to limit myself to things relating to my area of interest, history, geography, culture, etc. And I will tend to skip over things that I've seen well addressed in other places. One of my goals is to look at the context that is most often overlooked, so we won't be exhaustive. I will also probably end up breaking this into 2 or 3 videos, since there's a lot to cover, and I think people are more likely to watch 2 or 3 short videos than one long one. Our 3 topics to overview are agricultural images, places and geography, and seasons and holidays. One thing that we see a lot in the rest of the gospel and in other gospels is Jesus using agricultural images to make a point. In some ways, these images translate well to the modern day and help various people in different cultures still understand much of what Jesus was saying. Sheep and vines are common around the world, so even someone unfamiliar with first century Judea would be able to glean some understanding from Jesus' words when he said, "I am the vine, you are the branches." At the same time, if we ignore the fact that this was spoken at a different time, in a different place, to a different culture, we risk misunderstanding or losing some of the meaning. For example, here in the US, our tendency is to take any you statement as referring to me, personally and individually. This misses the fact that most of this appears to have been spoken to a small group of disciples. Not everything spoken to that small group necessarily by default applies to other disciples. It might, but we should be careful to check. It's also significant that it was spoken to a group, branches, plural. In our culture, we are much quicker to ask, how do I personally abide in the vine, rather than how do we as a community of believers abide in the vine? I think the original group would have been more likely to ponder the second question than we are. We are going to look at several of these images in more detail when we work through the chapters one by one, but as we do so, we will try to keep two things in mind. One, our cultural tendency to take everything as addressed to me specifically and individually is probably different than how the original audience would have understood it. And two, while even today people have some experience with sheep and vines, it can differ from first century experience in significant ways. We will try to show some images and discuss some agricultural practices that might help to illuminate some of the differences. While agricultural images could be considered an aspect of geography since they are very based on location, in this section we're going to talk about specific places. First, a quick review. We have spent time in the first video on John talking about the places Jesus visited and the routes he may have taken. To summarize, in the first 7 chapters of John, Jesus travels back and forth between the north, mostly in the region of Galilee, and the south, mostly around Jerusalem. He makes one notable trek through the central area of Samaria, but aside from that, he's mostly in Galilee or Jerusalem. We left him in Jerusalem in chapter 7, and that's where the pattern starts to shift. When we pick back up in chapter 8, he seems to still be in Jerusalem, and aside from 2 trips out of the region, possibly to the east to avoid the increasing anger of the religious leaders, most of the rest of the book takes place in and around Jerusalem. After his resurrection, one more trip to Galilee is recorded. I did a whole video on Jerusalem-specific geography. We'll touch on aspects as we look at some of the different events in this account, but we'll skip going into details here. Aside from specific places in Jerusalem, only 3 new locations are given in the second half of the book, and they are all in chapters 10 and 11. 10:40 mentions Jesus retreating across the Jordan. While that could refer to anywhere on the east side of the Jordan River, it's quite possible that this refers to Bethany beyond the Jordan, the location that was mentioned in chapter 1. Perhaps it's not referred to by that name here to avoid confusion with the next place Jesus travels, which is Bethany in Judea. This Bethany is where Lazarus, Mary, and Martha lived, and it's about 2 miles from Jerusalem, just over the Mount of Olives. It is distinctly different from the Bethany that is mentioned in chapter 1. After raising Lazarus from the dead, Jesus again departs from Jerusalem and goes to a place called Ephraim, described as a city near the wilderness. This location is not mentioned anywhere else in the Bible by this name. The region of Ephraim sometimes refers to the region roughly equivalent to Samaria, the tribal allotment of the tribe of Ephraim. But the city of Ephraim is not mentioned. The mention of it being near the wilderness could imply that it's near the Judean wilderness, the area between the hill country around Jerusalem and the Jordan Valley. However, in the Gospels, wilderness seems to mean any of the more unpopulated areas, not necessarily the Judean wilderness. If we look at sources outside the biblical text, we do find an Ephraim mentioned by Josephus, which appears to be near Bethel. Scholars have used that and other related information to connect Ephraim with the city in the Old Testament called Ophrah, and have suggested that this is the same city whose name just shifted over time and through different languages. There is some consensus that the modern city of Taibe near Ramallah preserved this name through yet another language shift. This seems to be the most likely place for Jesus to have gone. The name seems to fit. It's far enough from Jerusalem for some safety, but not too far with Passover quickly approaching. If it wasn't the exact location, it's fairly likely it was somewhere in this orange region that I have marked nearby. Those are the 3 new places away from Jerusalem for us to consider in this section. We'll look at a few Jerusalem-specific locations as we continue to work through the text, but otherwise there aren't any new locations for us to map. Seasons and holidays could be considered another aspect of geography since they also vary based on location. I spent a whole video discussing the Jewish calendar with its seasons and holidays. There are several holidays mentioned in the book of John, and understanding them and where they fall in the calendar is significant to understanding the book. The whole second half of the book takes place over roughly 5 months if we assume it's laid out somewhat chronologically. When we left off in chapter 7, Jesus was in Jerusalem for Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles. That usually takes place in October. The next holiday mentioned is in chapter 10. Jesus is in Jerusalem for the Feast of Dedication, or Hanukkah, which usually falls in December. This is the cold, rainy season. Snow is even possible in Jerusalem and other higher altitudes. The end of chapter 11 mentions Passover is approaching. Passover happens during the Jewish month of Nisan and generally falls in March or April. The rest of the book, except for chapter 21, takes place over a couple weeks' time. So, let's talk a little bit about the time of Passover. It comes in the spring of the year, which in this region means a few things. It means the weather is transitioning from being rainy to being dry. It can still rain, but it's more likely to be a soft sprinkle rather than a downpour. Grass is still green, flowers are still blooming, though things are starting to dry up, assuming it's been a year with normal amounts of rain. Specifically, the barley should be getting ripe and drying. Passover is supposed to always happen right around the barley harvest, and in any agrarian society, a new harvest is reason to celebrate. Days can be fairly warm and pleasant, but it can still get chilly at night. And as Passover starts, in the middle of the month, the moon would have been more or less close to full, likely providing a good amount of light for Jesus and his disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane. So, as we continue to move through this book, you can picture the season slowly shifting from cold and rainy to drier and warmer. Roads start muddy, but become drier. Intermittent streams start to slow down and dry up. Grasses begin bright green, but are slowly browning. Flowers bloom and fade throughout the season. Grain is ripening as the days grow warmer and longer. This sets the scene for our examination of the individual chapters. Chapter 8 starts with the best story that's not actually in John. That's not to say it didn't happen, or it's not meaningful. It just means that it was likely added by someone other than the original author at a later date. People are divided as to whether or not it was actually part of the life of Christ. The wisdom and kindness he displayed ring true to his character, but it's just something we don't know for certain. There are significant things we can talk about here, though, and I wouldn't be the first to question why only the woman was brought when obviously a man was involved, nor would I be the first to wonder what Jesus was writing. Maybe the 10 Commandments, the sins of the accusers. Was he even literate enough to do more than doodle? Some fascinating theories have been proposed, but as a geography nerd, my question is, what was he writing on? Verse 2 says he is again at the temple, and in verse 6 he is using his finger to write on the ground. But considering Jerusalem today and how the temple area has been depicted, I figure that just about every square inch of ground was paved in limestone, which leaves us with maybe 4 options. Either he was somewhere where there was dirt, maybe it's less paved than I assume. If we look at the modern area, we see quite a bit of green space, and perhaps this was the case in ancient times as well. Maybe he was tracing lines in the tile, or maybe he was actually engraving the limestone, which might make people nervous enough to leave no matter what he was writing. Or possibly whoever inserted this story in the book of John made a mistake with some of the details of the text. I haven't really done any research on this, so I have no idea what the favored position is, if there is one. I just think sometimes geography makes for some fun questions. Chapter 9 starts with Jesus healing the man who had been born blind. There are several things that I think are worth noting. First, it is significant that Jesus stresses that sin did not cause the man's blindness. I'm afraid that it is all too common in our churches today for people to believe that any illness or disability is directly caused by sin and that repentance could effect a cure. This is a generally harmful belief that directly contradicts this and other passages. The physical blindness of the man in this story is a direct contrast to the spiritual blindness of the Pharisees that Jesus points out. The latter is much more harmful. Jesus gives his second I am statement in this context. I am the light of the world, a light that can be seen more easily by a physically blind man than by the unimpaired religious leaders. The second thing of interest is that in this case, Jesus doesn't just speak and heal, he spits and forms a clay. It echoes the act of creation in Genesis. There are many types and causes of blindness, but people have suggested that perhaps this man was born without eyes, and Jesus was using the clay to form and create them. The third thing of interest is the pool. Jesus tells the man to go wash in the pool of Siloam. We are fairly certain where this pool is located, near the bottom of the city of David, and more excavations have been done there in recent years. We're not sure if there was a reason why Jesus told the man to wash there rather than any of the other places around the city where water could have been found. Perhaps it was as simple as proximity. The last thing I want to touch on is the very negative portrayal of the Jewish leaders, or the Jews, as they are referred to in many places in this gospel. Several places in this gospel place the Jews as the primary enemy of Jesus and his followers. Two thoughts on that. First, this is one of the reasons that scholars have suggested that the author of this book and his community were experiencing enmity or persecution from a local Jewish community in Ephesus, and that these events colored the way the author of John recorded the life of Christ. Specifically, there seems to be some evidence that the practice of putting people out of the synagogue, as happens to the man and his parents in this passage, was not practiced in Judaism until much later. Second, many of the things in John especially have been used to justify anti-Semitism by Christians for centuries, and it is something we as believers must keep in mind and wrestle with. Rabbi Michael Cook offers this helpful insight. Quote, "The fundamental structure of John's work accordingly is a contrast. The disciples, imperfect as they are, slowly but surely learn to believe, while the Jews fail for the most part repeatedly to do so. John's paramount concern is not anti-Judaism, but rather challenging unbelievers to become believers." In John, we start to see a transition around chapter 10. The first 9 chapters take place over 2 to 3 years and contain a lot of stories, travels, miracles interspersed with sermons. The rest of the book takes place over about 4 or 5 months. After chapter 10, there's only one more miracle and one more trip away from Jerusalem. The rest of the book is Jesus' last words to his disciples, plus the account of his trial, death, and resurrection. This means that while we have less geography to look at, we have more things with cultural and historical significance to consider. We won't touch on all of them, but we'll try to hit some as examples of the sorts of things to look for as you study. Chapter 10 hits us with 2 more I am statements. We've seen a couple I am statements already from Jesus, using things from daily life that his audience would have recognized as illustrations. In the video on the first 7 chapters, we looked a little at the statement, "I am the bread of life," and stressed how important it is to understand what was meant in the original culture before we try to apply it to our own. The same holds true of the rest of the I am statements. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the true vine. In chapter 10, Jesus gives 2 I am statements associated with sheep and shepherds. Even today, it's hard to go very far in this region without running into a flock of sheep and goats with their shepherd. To this day, sheep and goats are an important part of the economy in this region, especially among the Bedouin and Arab populations. Their practices today seem to echo what would have been done in Jesus' day. So, when Jesus started talking about sheep and shepherds, all of his listeners would have had at least observational knowledge, and many probably would have had more practical knowledge from caring for sheep themselves. So broad was the understanding of this illustration that Jesus chose to use it 2 ways. First, he said, "I am the door." It might be tempting to think of a nice sturdy wooden door and imagine that is what Jesus meant. But remember, our context is sheep in the 1st century. During the day, sheep and goats often wander freely with their shepherd, but at night it can be helpful to have them in an enclosed area to keep them protected from wild animals, thieves, and the elements. Barbed wire hadn't been invented yet, as far as I know, so enclosures tended to be made of rocks, possibly with a cave for some shelter. Then the shepherd could sit or lay in the opening to the enclosure to ensure that no one could enter or leave without passing him or her by. The shepherd was the door. So when Jesus speaks again and says, "I am the good shepherd," it was somewhat redundant, the same image with different emphasis. Again, most of its audience would have been familiar with both good and bad shepherding practices. The good shepherd has a number of defining characteristics. He's willing to do anything to protect the sheep. His sheep know his voice, and he knows his sheep. Again, those would have been recognizable characteristics. Today, there are fewer natural predators in this region, so I've never seen a shepherd fight off a lion. But I have seen a flock of sheep and goats approach a stream to drink, and then, as they finish, at a signal I didn't quite recognize, they turn as a group to go back the way the shepherd was calling them. They knew his voice, his call, and they followed without pause or question because of that relationship that they had. And he knew that they were following him. He didn't need to pause to count or call again to be sure. This is perhaps one of the most well-known chapters of John. It contains the shortest verse in the English Bible, Jesus wept, and it contains one of the most significant miracles Jesus did in his ministry, the resurrection of a man who had been dead for 4 days. We've already looked a little bit at geography. Bethany is quite close to Jerusalem, a dangerous place for Jesus at this juncture in his ministry. Questions of geography sometimes come up when we examine why Jesus waited 2 days before heading back to Judea. We're not entirely sure where Jesus was, somewhere across the Jordan, but he probably could have made it back to Bethany in a day or two. Since when he reached Bethany, Lazarus had already been dead for 4 days, it seems unlikely that Jesus could have reached him before his death, even if he had gone right away. But why did he wait if Lazarus would have died either way? I've seen a lot of suggested ideas, but I just don't think we can be certain of the reason, aside from what Jesus himself said. Somehow it's for the glory of God. There are many significant things happening here, but one other thing I think is worth noting is that Lazarus never says anything. Not in this chapter, not in the next chapter where he's banqueting with Jesus. His sisters Mary and Martha both have plenty to say, but nothing from Lazarus is recorded. This is another place where we just don't know why, but I think there are a couple of possibilities that are kind of fun and worth considering. First, some have suggested that Lazarus was the author of the book of John. He doesn't need to record what he said because the whole book is a record of his words. I don't know how likely this is, but it is one suggested possibility. A second possibility is that Lazarus was disabled in some way. Perhaps he had Down syndrome or was nonverbal. This would explain both why he doesn't say anything and why he seems to live with his sisters rather than perhaps with a wife and children. Again, this isn't definite. There are other culturally appropriate reasons why a brother and sisters would be living together, but it's possible. What I do think is significant is that it wouldn't have mattered to Jesus if Lazarus was a pillar of society who would go on to write part of the New Testament, or if he was a disabled young man known for nothing more than his cheerful grins and big hugs. Either way, he was Jesus' friend, and Jesus loved him. This chapter ends with Jesus again departing the region until Passover. And this is where we will end our video. We'll continue soon with an examination of further chapters, so please make sure you are subscribed and have your notifications set up if you want to be notified when that is published. And as always, if you have comments or questions or things you want me to talk about in the next video, I am always happy to hear what you are thinking about. Thank you for watching and exploring the physical context of the Gospel of John with me. I'll see you next time. Bye.